Scattered around the forest in Poland like archaeological ruins, the crumbling concrete bunkers for decades stored Soviet nuclear warheads. Today, they store only memories, deeply painful for Poland, joyous for the Kremlin, of the vanished empire that President Vladimir Putin wants to rebuild, starting with his war in Ukraine. "Nobody here trusted the Russians before, and we certainly don't trust them now," said Mieczysław Żuk, a former Polish soldier who oversees the once top-secret nuclear site. The bunkers were abandoned by the Soviet military in 1990 as Moscow's hegemony over East and Central Europe unraveled in what President Putin has described as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Now Eastern European countries fear a catastrophe of their own could be in the making as Mr. Putin seeks to turn back the clock and reclaim Russia's lost sphere of influence, perilously close to their frontiers. Even leaders in the region who have long supported Mr. Putin are sounding the alarm. Warnings about Moscow's intentions, often dismissed until last Thursday's invasion of Ukraine as Russophobia by those without experience of living in proximity to Russia, are now widely accepted as prescient. And while there has been debate about whether efforts to expand NATO into the former Soviet bloc were a provocation to Mr. Putin, his assault on Ukraine has left countries that joined the American-led military alliance convinced they made the right decision. A Russian attack on Poland or other former members of the defunct Warsaw Pact that now belong to NATO is still highly unlikely, but Mr. Putin has made the unthinkable possible, warned Gabrielius Landsbergis, the foreign minister of Lithuania, Poland's neighbor to the north. "We live in a new reality. If Putin is not stopped, he will go further," Mr. Landsbergis said in an interview. His country, bordering both Russia and its ally Belarus, has declared a state of emergency. Mr. Ilves announced this week on Twitter that he was accepting apologies for all the patronizing nonsense from Western Europeans who complained that we Estonians were paranoid about Russian behavior. In a telephone interview, Mr. Ilves said he had not received any apologies yet but was gratified to see Russia's shills and useful idiots getting their comeuppance. Western Europeans who once scoffed at his dark view of Russia, he added, have suddenly become East Europeans in their fearful attitudes. This past week marks the end of a 30-year-long era that we can all come together and sing Kumbaya. Memories of Soviet hegemony over what is now NATO's eastern flank, imposed after the Red Army liberated the region from Nazi occupation at the end of World War II, vary from country to country depending on history, geography and convoluted domestic political struggles. For Poland, a nation repeatedly invaded by Russia over the centuries, they are of humiliation and oppression. Baltic states, extinguished as independent nations by Stalin in 1940 and dragooned at gunpoint into the Soviet Union, feel much the same way. Mr. Putin's war to bring Ukraine to heel, however, has united the region in alarm, with even Serbia voicing dismay. On Monday, Bulgaria's prime minister fired his defense minister, who caused outrage by suggesting that the conflict in Ukraine should not be called a war but a special military operation, the Kremlin's euphemism for its invasion. Only Milorad Dodik, the belligerent, pro-Kremlin leader of Bosnia's ethnic Serbian enclave, Republika Srpska, has shown any sympathy for Mr. Putin's war, stating that Russia's reasons for its invasion were received with understanding. Outrage over Russian aggression, even in countries historically sympathetic to Moscow, has derailed years of work by Russian diplomats and intelligence operatives to cultivate allies like Ataka, an ultranationalist political party in Bulgaria that is so close to Russia that it once launched its election campaign in Moscow. Even Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who usually delights in defying fellow European leaders and stood with Mr. Putin last month in the Kremlin, has now endorsed a raft of sanctions imposed on Russia by the European bloc. He is still blocking transport of weapons into Ukraine across Hungary's border but has curbed his previously gushing enthusiasm for Mr. Putin. So too has Milos Zeman, the previously Kremlin-friendly president of the Czech Republic. "I admit I was wrong," Mr. Zeman said this week.